Hello, my name is Jennifer de la Cruz, and I will be talking about classical conditioning. The first article I will be talking about is called The purpose of this article is to talk about classical conditioning and theories of psychologists and others who have doubts about the ways in which it is experimented in classical conditioning with children, adults, and animals, in which both Dickinson and McIntosh are in between against classical conditioning and how it is run. When psychologists run experiments on animals and humans. An example from this article is, we may sympathize with these doubts, but they only make it more rather than less important to study those phenomena, such as conditioning in animals, which can plausibly be regarded as simple cases of associative learning. This sentence explains how classical conditioning in animals can have doubts about whether or not the case is important to learn and study more for that case. They also discuss in their article how conditioning experiments comes from the relationship between events and the subject's environment. Classical conditioning has different types of conditioning experiments that psychologists use for the types of experiments they are going to study about in their case. The examples of the different types of conditioning are varieties in conditioning, categories of conditioning, and elements of association. These conditioning have different types of ways in experimenting the studies. An example that explains categories of conditioning is conditioned stimuli may be categorized along two orthogonal dimensions, the relationship between CS and US, which is conditioned stimuli and unconditioned stimuli, and the effective value of the US, of the unconditioned stimuli. Variations along these dimensions produce CS with apparently opposing behavioral effects. That's for the first article. And for the second article, that Kalu and Shamjuk discussed about working on different types of classical conditioning and differentiation that rats differentiates the rats seeing and doing between mechanisms. They will work with other psychologists on experimenting on rats and how they respond when learning how to train. Example from the article. We show that the intentional associative SLG model of classical conditioning, based on the 1966 research of Shamajuk, Lamb, and Gray, correctly describes experimental results regarded as evidence of casual learning in rats. A. Interventions actuate responding following common cause training but do not interfere on subsequent responding during observation. And B. Interventions do not affect responding after direct cause training. Or C. Casual training. This sentence describes how they will be doing the experiment on the rats and how they will run the tests, data, and studies on them. An experiment they discussed in the article, a psychologist leasing Eato's experiment 3 with common cause and direct training, in which they use light and food on the rats, and how they function also by adding noise when they are given food. They do two types of experiments with the rats. One is light/tone, and the other is light/food. They also do noise/food on the rats. In the experiment, the one they use light/food, the rat will have to look for the food while the light is directly on them. When the psychologist leasing on his first day on the experiment with light/food and noise/food with the rats, his observation on them was that they really had a strong response with the experiment that they were on. So as they observed them on the first day, they saw that the light would give them a bit of a behavior when they were trying to look for their food. And also with the noise, loud noises, they would tend to make them also get a behavior to find their food. And on the third article that I will be talking about is in the last article, it talks about the classical conditioning on opioid activity in rat fetuses. When the mom rat feeds the baby rat in different types of experimenting on them. Example in what they discussed. In a prenatal model of classical conditioning, rat fetuses received presentations of an artificial nipple, conditioned stimulus, CS, paired with milk, unconditioned stimulus. The psychologist involved with this experiment will have two types of milk to feed to the baby rats. In this case, the artificial nipple will have no opioid activity, while the other that is milk will have opioid activity for the baby rats to have in their body systems. When they discovered that the artificial nipple, the CS, is that the rats altered behavior during the experiment, trial, and conditioning. Another interesting quote about the milk is, milk can serve as an effective reinforcer for instrumental conditioning and can function as an unconditioned stimulus to support classical conditioning in neonatal rats. This explains more on how the milk can be an effective way for the different types of conditioning, instrumental conditioning, and the support of classical conditioning. On neonatal rats that the psychologist uses, they gather data on the behavior of baby rats, on where they drink their milk out of an artificial nipple or milk. What the psychologists also learned from the experiment is that the fetal rats have learned real quick to behavioral and neurochemical responses on suckling, which meaning how to suck on the nipple or on the milk. And those are my 3 articles that I use on my annotated bibliography. Thank you.